Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Dr. Upasana Singh, and I'm the academic leader in the discipline of Information Systems and Technology in the School of Management, IT, and Governance at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. The United Nations General Assembly proclaimed January 24th as the International Day of Education, in celebration of the role of education for peace and development. The theme for 2023, as defined by UNESCO, is to invest in people, prioritize education. On this day, in celebration of the International Day of Education, we welcome you all to the first webinar in our HEAL series, where we are prioritizing education by focusing on the future of the university. We are delighted to see that we have attracted academics from a number of South African higher education institutions, as well as international delegates. In addition, I am particularly encouraged to see a large number of students attending today's session. We also extend our gratitude to our panelists, Prof. Mohi, the Commission of Higher Education in Mauritius, Prof. Van Wyk from UNISA, and Dr. Ngambi from UCT. We thank our Dean, Prof. Saibet Mutareko, for his support in our series. And is Prof. Mutareko around, Craig?
I don't see his name on the list at the moment.
Okay, so we'll invite Prof. Mutareko to say a few words when he joins us later in the session. The discipline of Information Systems and Technology at UKZN prides itself in not only offering modules which are graduate relevant, but we also have a team of dedicated academics who innovate in their own teaching and assessment practices to ensure that our students have an engaging and rewarding learning experience. One of these passionate academics is our facilitator for today, Prof. Craig Blewett, who is a senior professor in our discipline. Prof. Blewett has a PhD in educational technology and is the developer of the Activated Classroom Teaching ACT model. With over 25 years experience in education technology, Craig is an internationally acclaimed speaker who seeks to motivate educators to teach differently in our rapidly changing digital world. We hope that today's session will be the start of the conversation around University 4.0, and we encourage you to join us in our future sessions, as well as keep the conversation going between sessions. I now request Prof. Blewett to introduce our panelists and to facilitate this session.
Right. Thank you very much, Upasana. Very excited to be here and to share this session with everyone. Let me just get our, right, there we go. As you can see, I'm in my virtual lab here. I thought it would be appropriate considering what we want to talk about. We have called it a Higher Education Activation Lab. We were trying to think of a name that we could come up with. It wasn't necessarily the acronym that we wanted, but we were looking for something that had to do with something positive and active coming out of the session that we're going to have. So that's really what we wanted to focus on, obviously higher education and how to do something positive with it. So before we get going, what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to share my screen and we are going to have a quick intro to one or two small things, our topic in particular. And if you'd like, it'd be great for you to follow along. So this is, I'm using Mentimeter for those of you who've never used it before. It's a really fun app that enables us to engage a little bit. It's really great for when you're teaching your students. And so if you want to follow along, you can just open your browser and you'll see at the top of the screen, there's the link, www.menti.com. And it'll ask you for a code. There's the code, 13442045. So I'll give you a moment. In fact, I can even drop that into the chat to make life simpler for people, which means you could probably just click on the link. Right, so there's a link in the chat. So if you want to click on that, it should open Mentimeter for you. And I'll know you here. If you give it a thumbs up, you'll see there's a little button in the bottom right. You can click it and it'll do a little thumbs up. Yep, there we go. So I can see 4 people have already got in. So we're just going to have a very quick background just to what we want to talk about today. and then I will introduce our panelists and we will get going so that we can try and unpack some of the important things as we stand right now at the cusp of what I believe is a huge inflection point in education and obviously higher education specifically. So if you managed to get in, there we go. 26 have got in, fantastic. So let's have a quick look at a couple of things. Right, so then let's get an indication of where you're from before we get going. You should be able to, on your, whether you're doing this on your laptop or on your mobile device, drop a pin roughly. Doesn't matter if it's not that accurate. The pin drops somewhere in Southern Africa. We'll just see, we've got a few people coming from different parts, slightly higher up on the East Coast there, and maybe that's the Mauritius pin over there. And there's some, South America, lovely. So just an indication of where people are joining us from. So you drop your pin there, obviously lots coming from Southern Africa and some from our University of KwaZulu-Natal, and probably also from UCT and UNISA. So it's good to have everyone here. I see we're up to 84 participants, which is excellent. Right, so there we've got some coming far up north there. Excellent. So we're starting to get a little bit of a spread heading up into the northern hemisphere. I'm not even going to try and predict where that is. It could be somewhere in the UK or in between in the sea somewhere. Not quite sure. But we've got people coming from all over. Right. So let's have a quick chat about what this topic is. And I just want to do a little bit of a background as to, broadly speaking, what University 4.0 is about. Now, you will be able to get involved beyond this. We want this to be interactive. There are a number of ways in which you can interact with us. It is the Activation Lab after all. So I can see someone reading in the chat has said they're from Namibia. Thank you. Antolia, you can communicate via the chat. There is another space that we've got, which there is the link is on your screen, and that's a Padlet wall. So the reason we're using a Padlet wall is just another fun way for you to be involved, but it allows some sort of permanence to what's going on here. You'll see on the Padlet wall what I've done. I've set up 4 columns. One is questions, and I've already posed a question there. If you want to toss in an answer to that, you can reply to that, but it could be other questions you want, and we'll try and pick up some of those, either questions posted in the chat or there later. If you've just got some general thoughts or ideas, there's a column for that. There's a column for interesting links. I dropped 2 that are really interesting. One is from PwC, their Vice Chancellor survey as to how education was going to transform. And the other one is from Deloitte, some insights into the hybrid campus. Both of those are relatively recent. And then there's another column for others. So if you want to drop something in there, you can. So there is the link. It is, I could probably stick that in the chat as well, just to make your life easier. It is bit.ly/heal wall. Hopefully that works. All right, that didn't really come out as a link, but close enough. Okay, so you can just point your phone at the QR code and you'll be able to jump in. Right, so that's just going to be a sort of back channel for us to chat about a few things. What I wanted to do is quickly talk about what University 4.0 potentially is. We love all these terms, and obviously we've heard of all sorts of other terms related to this. We're living in the fourth industrial era in a sense, and what is University 4.0? Here's a very short video, and I'm going to take 2 takes on this. This is just a short video, and it's one suggestion, then I'm going to give you another one, which is also particularly interesting. So let's just watch this quickly.
Education is no stranger to change, perhaps now more so than ever. In Education 1.0, we saw learners as receptacles of knowledge. We spoke, and they listened. We gave them information, and they regurgitated it. It was a primitive system, with little or no collaboration. Technology in the classroom was banned, and information was usually in the form of a stand-up routine, supported by handouts, textbooks, videos, and occasionally the World Wide Web. Then came Education 2.0. Learners were encouraged to learn in more spontaneous and explorative ways. We facilitated the learning opportunities, and they gained knowledge by formulating and solving their own problems. Technology was used in basic ways. Wikis, podcasts, blogs, and personal websites enabled learners to directly interact with the online content and one another. A few clicks later, and we entered Education 3.0. Learners now share their knowledge to co-create new knowledge. They have their own access to information, the option to learn virtually, and platforms to easily connect with us and one another. Education is no longer centred upon a back and forth between them and us. Instead, we have been transformed into a coach, advisor, learner and resource guide, providing our learners with the tools and direction to create their own ideas in the digital landscape and beyond. So what's next? We are now on the cusp of a new phase, Education 4.0. This vision of the future of education aligns itself with the emerging fourth industrial revolution. With the world changing so rapidly and so often, we need to ensure that our learners are adaptable and at the forefront of current and emerging technologies. Education 4.0 takes the lessons of Education 3.0 and propels them forward into something much more dynamic. Smart technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, cloud workflows and more are informing change across the board, and we need to embrace and adapt with our learners to enable them to develop the skills they need, not only to effectively use current technologies, but to adapt to and embrace emerging ones.
Right. Well, there we have a relatively interesting look at what the four areas are in a broad brushstroke way. Here's another way of putting it, these four educational eras, as we have come to term them. University 1.0 is like the grandparent of higher education, where students would go to a physical campus and listen to lectures in person. It's like the old-fashioned way of learning, where the teacher is always in front of the class. University 2.0 is like the cool aunt or uncle of higher education, where technology is introduced to supplement learning. It's like adding some trendy new apps to your phone. It makes things a little more fun and efficient. University 3.0 is like the hip cousin of higher education, where online and distant learning come into play. It's like having the freedom to attend class from your own living room in your pajamas if you want to. And finally, University 4.0 is like the tech-savvy younger sibling of higher education, where advanced technologies like AI and machine learning are integrated. It's like upgrading your phone to the latest model. It's more personalized, engaging, and future-oriented. So that's quite a fun way of trying to understand across all these generations. But here's the interesting thing. That was written by ChatGPT, not by me. So that was written by an AI itself. When I asked it, tell me about it, and then I said, well, tell it to me in a little bit more of a fun way, and it said, sure, and it came up with that great little metaphor of how to explain it. So I think the point itself is made quite well. We're in a new era. We've had a major inflection point, two major inflection points that have happened literally in the last couple of years. The one was COVID, which drove us all out of the traditional classrooms, moved us into online spaces, made us rethink how things could be done. And more recently, we've had AI come in a huge way. It hasn't even hit us yet academically, but it was released the end of last year, and that's going to have another impact. And so we now have to start to think very seriously, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond? How are we going to adapt? There is no going back. There's only stepping forward. And so this is what I now want to have a look at. Our Higher Education Activation Lab Session 1, University 4.0. Now what? So with that, we're now going to kick off our discussion. And we have four panelists, and I'm going to do something fun for a moment that we want to try and make this as everyone feel like they really are part of this, what's going on. So I want to try and hopefully I can remove the people that I don't need here. And stick Craig down there so that he is in the panel. Try and pull out a few other people that don't need to be here, which could be quite a few of you. Sorry, I'm just, if you're not on the panel and I asked you, don't feel sad. It's just I want to stick my panelists down here so that they feel like they're in the room with me. This is one of the wonderful things we can do. Right there, I've got, and please excuse me if I don't get your sizes exactly right. It's part of the joy. Right, we will fix everyone in a moment. Right, and there we've got Dick up there. Okay, fantastic. So I'm nearly getting everyone in the right spot, and we'll make Craig a little bit bigger so we can see him. And this is one way to gain weight quite quickly. So there we go. Oops, sorry, if I make you too big too quickly, You'll have to just forgive that. I can weight loss you as fast as I can make you gain weight. So well, there we go. Okay, roughly we got us all the same size. There we go. So now we all feel like we're in the same room. So to my fellow panelists, thank you so much for all joining me. And as I said, the idea here is to have a little bit of a chat around University 4.0 and try and talk about the now what. One of the things we wanted to do in our activation lab is try and keep it as practical as possible. Obviously, there's the theory behind all of this, and that's why we have all of you on here, because you're distinguished academics in this field, and we need to build on theory, but also we need to take steps forward and do things, which is really important. So we're going to start by introducing our first panelist, and that is Professor Ramila Mohi. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her. Yes, you can see her there. In real life, she's probably bigger than just the head, but at least you get an idea of who she is here. So I'm going to introduce her, and then our basic format is Professor Mohi will then just talk a little bit about her topic, which I'll tell you about in a moment, and then I'll introduce our next panelist, Professor Van Wyk, and then Professor Nkambi, and each of them will talk about their topic. And then we'll have an opportunity. I will put some questions to them, and as I said, there's also an opportunity for you to ask questions. And you can either come on camera or on audio, or you can pop them in the chat or in one of the other places, and I'll put it to our panelists. So,
sorry, Craig, to interrupt you. There's a number of attendees who are having a problem with sound. I can hear you clearly. Panelists, can you hear Craig clearly? Because then it's the problem is on the attendee side.
Yeah, I got a thumbs up here.
Okay. So thanks, Craig. I just needed to check. Thank you.
Okay, right, cool. Okay, so I see people in the chat. So yeah, that's always part of the joy. We should have got the audit transcript going. Then you could see that. So, but we don't have it at the moment. So we'll just go. Hopefully, sound issues will solve themselves. One of the things we said before we even started this panel, we had a meeting with our panelists, is one of the big things, and it'll come up probably in our discussion with our new era of education, is a 21st century skill we all want to have in our students, and it's adaptability. And that's exactly what happens in these things. When I suddenly go vanished, whoops, and I'm not sure, one of our panelists vanishes, we need to learn to adapt to those things. And I think that's a key 21st century skill. Right, so let's kick off our panel, and I would like to formally welcome Professor Mohi. Professor Mohi is the Higher Education Commission, is headed by Professor Mohi, and she holds an engineer degree in energy and environment from, and I'm going to do my best French here, Institut National des Sciences Appliquées de Lyon, France. Well, I don't know how well I did that, but anyway. And she has a PhD from the University of Mauritius. Prof. Mohi has 25 years of experience as a professor and head of department in the field of chemical and environmental engineering. She's also served as Dean of the Faculty of Engineering from 2009 to 2012 and as Vice Chancellor of the University of Mauritius from 2013 to 2016. She's also held the position of National Research Chair in Solid Waste Management at Mauritius Research and Innovation Council. Prof. Mohi is an experienced education specialist with a demonstrated history of working in the development of higher education models and policies. She's worked at the Commonwealth of Learning from 2017 to 2020 as an education specialist and has assisted many Commonwealth member states in their development of higher education policies and strategies. She expertly guided governments and institutions on e-learning for sustainable development, quality assurance, and employability. She's published over 100 international research and conference papers, edited 3 books, 7 book chapters, and has supervised to date more than 50 undergrad, 30 masters, and 20 doctoral students in the field of energy and environmental engineering. Her expertise has been recognized both at a national and regional level. She carried out over 20 major consultancy projects in the field of environmental science and engineering. Prof. Mohi has received a number of awards in recognition, including the winner of the African Union Best Woman Scientist Award for Science, Technology and Innovation in 2009. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry in the UK and a fellow of the Mauritius Academy of Science and Technology, honorary fellow of the Institute of Chemical Engineers in the UK, and she is, among others, an associate member of the International Association of Universities. So we are very privileged to have Prof. Mohi with us today, and we thank you so much for giving up your time. I'm sure you're extremely busy, but we really do appreciate your insights, because these are things that can make a huge impact to many universities and your insights. So I'm going to hand over to Prof. Mohi, and she is going to be speaking on the future of higher education. So Prof. Mohi, if you want to share your screen, it should be possible to do.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Craig. And a lot of thanks to Upsana as well. Are you hearing me properly, and are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this introduction of you, Craig, and really like that ChatGPT. And I have to start with this joke that I just read about the ChatGPT, that whenever, I mean, from Mauritius, we cannot have access to it, but it seems that right. It seems that in some countries where you can have access, when you start using ChatGPT, it asks you, are you sure you're not a robot? So that's very ironic. Right. So as Craig said, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm Professor Mohi, and this presentation I'm going to make today, it's on behalf of my two other colleagues, Sumaira and Arsha, and we are from the Higher Education Commission in Mauritius, which is the apex regulatory body for regulating universities, accrediting programs, funding public universities, promoting research, and a number of things. And we like to be visionary. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about micro-credentials, which for me is part or will be part of the University Hub 4.0. I'll talk a little bit about examples in the world and also about the Mauritian response. Now, futures of higher education, you know, for the past 2, 3, 4 years since the COVID pandemic, everybody is talking about the futures of higher education. Where we'll be in 2030, where will we be in 2050? Will we have universities? Will robots replace us? Will we have brick and mortar universities, etc.? But this is very uncertain. But one thing we are certain is that it's not going to be like now. For sure, it's going to be very different. And we have to be, as you said, Craig, very adaptable and flexible to the demands of the world that is awaiting us. So one of the areas which I'm going to focus today, I know I don't have a lot of time, I'll try to really rush, is on the pathways and micro-credentials. Everybody talks about digital badges, micro-credentials, etc. So we want to know, will that be part of our world, and how quickly will this invade us, and how should we be prepared for that? So why micro-credentials? We've been seeing throughout the different decades that nowadays experts across higher education are all calling for new pathways, agile pathways, flexible pathways, multiple streams, reskilling, upskilling, and lifelong learning. It seems that now we cannot go in a certain environment without talking about lifelong learning. So learners need consistent upskilling for a variety of reasons. And one of them is definitely to be able to be adaptable to the future of work, to the world of work, to be able to be, how would I say, really useful in the society that is coming ahead. And I like to share this slide, because on one hand, this is a slide which was elaborated by OECD. It has to be updated, but it does give for a number of countries unemployment rates, but at the same time, it gives recruitment difficulties. So, you know, this seems like to be like a paradox. We have unemployment, but still we're having recruitment difficulties. And it seems that when we go through literature, in many countries, one of the most fundamental reason is that there's a talent shortage. It seems that the talent that is coming out is not really fit for what employers would need. So this also gives us an idea of how higher education should now be accompanied, I would say, by more skilling, and that can be achieved by micro-credentials. So what are micro-credential innovations in higher education? All these are the same things, right? Some people call it digital badges, open badges, micro-credentials, nano degrees, mini degrees, whatever word you want to call it. It's quite a loose word these days. And it's quite flexible. Here I'm just giving a little bit about the different typology that is used in micro-credentials. What is the purpose? As you can see, although I did talk about employment, but it's very often now cited as the pathway to a formal qualification. And many people in our former generations didn't have that possibility or opportunity to go to university. So that could provide, at the same time they're working, that could provide them opportunities. What is the mode of delivery? It's often, because of technology today, it's often on a hybrid mode, on an online mode. Some micro-credentials still exist as in person. It can be very flexible. It can be both cohort learning and I would say teacher-centered, learner-centered. You can have different types of credential, etc., etc. This is a slide which talks about how micro-credentials can be easily, how would I say, transformed to be very relevant. It has to be accredited. It has to meet a government standard. It has to be assessed, and it is flexible and stackable. Now, this is the word which I like the most with micro-credentials. Today with micro-credentials, if we manage really to put all our regulations, our quality assurance, all our systems in place, this will provide pathways to gain certificates, diplomas, degrees, and masters. And this is already being done by, I would say, developed countries like MIT has stackable micro-credentials leading to masters, mini masters, etc., etc. So what is the time of framework that has to be there? I'm just showing, this is one example, how micro-credentials could be based on a notional workload of 100 to 150 hours. And in the European system, they have developed this to be equal to around 4 to 6 ECTS credits. Now, before I go in different examples, I would really want to share that different countries are at different levels of developing micro-credentials. Some are advanced, some are starting, but I would say in our part of the world, at least in Mauritius, you will see later, we are really at the infancy stage. We are trying to see what kind of model would be good. So we are in the moment having a lot of discussions with stakeholders. This morning itself, we were having discussion with our Mauritian qualification authorities, how to really develop that across the continuum of higher technical, vocational, and higher education. So micro-credentials to support new learning pathways. What are we talking about is developing frameworks for micro-credentials in higher education. I'm insisting again in higher education. That would provide a means of organizing and orienting existing non-formal education programs across higher education systems by providing a basis for their classification and comparison. Different examples of micro-credentials, right? Okay, so this is a slide where it shows the progression from 2019 to 2022 about the different courses from Coursera, edX, FutureLearn, Class Central. All of you are aware of these different platforms, and all of these can be termed as micro-credentials. And you would see the progressions in terms of micro-credentials which have been used across the world. And you will see this is becoming more and more everywhere. Anyone today, because again of technology and advances in technology, can have access to any Coursera course or edX course, edX MicroMasters, FutureLearn programs. And most of the universities that work with HEC tend to ask me, oh, are we going to have a university of Coursera or of edX in the future? I think they are gaining space. They are gaining a lot of space, and we better work together. how can micro-credentials fit into a program? And you can see here, I just highlighted how it can fit into a undergraduate certificate, degree, graduate micro-credentials, postgraduate certificate, and a graduate degree. This is becoming more and more popular, and I'll just run through a different number of examples in the world. This is something that Malaysia does, where it has already integrated a MOOC, which is the Massive Online Open Course, which is a micro-credential, already integrated it in its curriculum, in its formal curriculum. So this is possible, and this is becoming more and more possible to integrate micro-credentials in university curriculum. This is another example of a theory of change in New Zealand, and it's a certificate in search engine optimization, which is a micro-credential offered by New Zealand Institute of Education. And I'll take this opportunity to just see how this can be assessed and how can this be based. So you will specify the level, you will be specifying the credit, number of credits, what is the aim of this program, and the outcome. Right? Outcome-based education. So when completing this micro-credential, graduates will be able to do this, LO1, LO2, LO3, which shows that in the same way as we are doing for qualifications, we can exactly do that same way for micro-credentials. Right, this is a roadmap of an employee taking micro-credentials at the Multimedia University Malaysia. So they already have a list of micro-credentials on a learning platform. The learner registers and pays the fees to access the micro-credential, and they go through the micro-credential. That's the advantage through blended learning or 100% online learning, and then earn the digital badge, and then they would put it there as a sort of qualification, and then it gets into the whole certification. So it's already there, being done, practiced by some universities. And this is one in Canada. When I was at the Commonwealth of Learning, I had the chance to really work with BC-CAT. And this is really seamless, how they integrate micro-credentials into their technical, vocational, higher technical, and in higher education. How this is recognized, how this is assessed, and then how this is taken on board in the qualifications. Mauritian response. So what are we doing in Mauritius when we look at all this that is really kind of overwhelming us? So in our higher education strategic plan at the Higher Education Commission, we have one of the pillar, which is supporting relevant higher education and research. This is our strategic plan 2022-2025, where one key action is supporting micro-credentials. So this is definitely very high on our agenda, and we are currently working on that. And this has been made possible for us because for the past 2 years, we are implementing a number of technology-enabled learning strategies in universities, where we are promoting open and distance learning, we are promoting open educational resources, and we are promoting the use of digital badges. And we had the chance 2 years ago to have, with the Commonwealth of Learning, a possibility of awarding 3,000 scholarships to Mauritian learners to go over Coursera, Udemy, and grow with Google courses. And we have more than 3,000 learners who have completed a number of Coursera courses, of Udemy courses, and grow with Google courses. And now the next step is how to integrate this in our university's curriculum for this to be recognized, and then also for this to be recognized in lifelong learning. We are also developing at the HEC a new regulatory framework with a number of regulations and a number of standards. And definitely we are going to integrate in the Mauritius National Qualification Framework the whole notion of micro-credentials. Actually, in our act, part of our mandate is to develop the credit value and transfer system. We are, I would say, in the middle of it, and soon starting consultations with stakeholders on this framework. this is the National Credit and Transfer Value System, and we have been working with the European Training Center. We've been working with the African continent, ACQF, etc. So we are developing our National Credit and Transfer Value System, and we want to leapfrog so that micro-credentials are already seen in that one. Challenges to scaling up the use or to introducing the use of micro-credentials depending on where you are. So complexity of micro-credential offering, when you look at any course on Coursera or any course, whatever you develop, it can range from 2 hours of music to like 200 hours of how to code or things like that. So it's really very complex. It's not a simple thing to have a sort of blanket instrument on how to address micro-credentials. Constraints in the recognition and quality assurance. Oh, yes, I can talk about that, being the regulatory body. So it's not just the recognition of micro-credentials, but we have to be prepared for the recognition of micro-credential providers, right? We would very soon have providers which would not be universities in our case, probably, and then we will have to make sure that they are fully fully there, fit to be able to enter that stream. Lack of understanding. A lot of people talk about micro-credentials without really knowing what this means. And also lack of trust. Already when e-learning came in, when actually I would say the COVID pandemic made it simpler that we had to go for e-learning, but prior to that, there have been so many debates about e-learning. I'm sure there are a lot of discussion about micro-credentials, etc. This is just to sum up about challenges wherever you are. And in terms of Mauritius, the way forward for micro-credentials, these are the different, I've tried to list this morning, what is it that we have to do now and start really thinking deeply is ensuring quality assurance of micro-credentials. We need to have standards, we need to have framework. How will we measure that value of that micro-credential? What are the skills that have been achieved, level outcome? Are we going to use an approach like qualification framework? Are we going to distinguish between credit-based and non-credit-based? And we will definitely need to have a registry for micro-credentials so that we can ensure transparency. Approval process of micro-credentials. How far are vice chancellors ready to integrate micro-credentials at Senate level in their programs? How reluctant they are. I mean, this is a big debate, I would say. Approval of micro-credentials providers, I talk about that. And of course, we have to work recognition on the Mauritius National Qualification Framework. Do we want to integrate it in the existing MNQF, or do we want to work alongside the MNQF? That's a big question. And of course, micro-credentials is infusion in the National Credit Transfer System. This is something that HEC is doing. So I think we have a better flexibility to be able to do that. And something that we often forget, we will have to modify our existing probably regulations, guidelines, Education and Training Act to include the usage of micro-credentials, and we have to look at authenticity, security, etc., etc. With this, I'm not sure whether I've used my 15 minutes, but I tried really to rush. Thank you very much, and I look forward to discussing with you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Prof. May. It was really, really interesting and a fascinating topic. I would just love to focus on micro-credentials and have a whole lot of questions that have already sprung to mind. I've jotted down some because I think it's such a key topic. But what we're going to do is we're just going to do each of the little sessions, and so I'm going to say those questions. And as I said earlier, if anyone has got questions, feel free to put them into on the wall if you like. I see there are some questions here on our Padlet wall, or you can stick them in the chat here. So thank you again for that really interesting intro to micro-credentialing and where that's going to play a role in the future of higher ed, which I absolutely agree that it is. So that's very interesting. Right, next we are going to look to Professor Jancy van Wyk to speak. Just look there, she miraculously appeared in her seat just like that, the wonder of digital. Let me just briefly introduce Prof van Wyk to you. Prof van Wyk lectures international politics at the University of South Africa, UNISA. in Pretoria. She has completed a DPhil, International Relations, on South Africa's post-apartheid nuclear diplomacy. And it's published on, among other things, South African foreign policy and diplomacy, African politics, South African politics, and the politics of technology. She's the co-editor of the South African Foreign Policy Review, volumes 1 to 4, and a Fulbright alumna at the University of Delaware, New York, US. She is a member of the South African Academy for Science and Art. She's been a guest lecturer at various universities and the South African National Intelligence Academy, the South African National Defence College, the South African National War College, and the South African Diplomatic Academy. She has completed consultancies for the World Bank, UNESCO, the Institute for Security Studies, the South African Department of Foreign Affairs, Consultancy, Africa Intelligence, and the African Union, African Commission on Nuclear Energy. From June 2010 until October 2014, she served on the South African Minister of Trade and Industry's South African Council for Space Affairs. She's a recipient of various academic awards and is a rated NRF researcher. So what I really love about our panel, we've got such diversity, but we're brought together by one common interest, and it's around higher education and where it's going. And so very excited to hear Prof. van Wyk, who's going to talk to us about curriculum, teaching and assessment 4, which is one of her expertise areas, challenges and opportunities. So Prof. van Wyk, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Blewett, as well as Dr. Singh, for not only the organization of this event, but also for the kind invitation to this event. Thank you very much. I am going to share my screen and then start the presentation. Please let me know if you cannot see it. Then I can see what there's something there. I hope that it is visible.
Yeah, that's visible.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. I am curious to see how can we address the challenges and the opportunities presented to us with technology and IR 4.0. So my point of departure is that we need to optimize the university. 4.0 requires the alignment of curriculum, teaching, and assessment. But there are challenges and opportunities that we need to be mindful. So what now and where do we go from here? Let me take you back, and here I'm carbon dating myself to Captain Kirk and company of the Star Trek. This, for those that are very young, is a television series, Star Trek, of this to a group of people on a mission in space. Now, what I like about this series is that it brought to us an imagination of space and technology to such an extent that the ideas have been brought into curriculum. There's a handbook on Star Trek. There's teaching a social curriculum of Star Trek. The point I'm trying to make is that science fiction has become science fact. And this is the kind of thinking that we need to develop if we want to meet the demands of a University 4.0. So meanwhile, back on planet Earth, we have to shift our understanding and our aspirations between reality and an idiotopia, this ideal educational system that we would like. We see that the fourth industrial era is still playing itself out. There are some emerging signs of the fifth industrial revolution. Plus, we see that it is a period of innovation and disruption, and real-time response is required. But we know that there are higher education inequalities and inequities, and we need to adapt as soon as possible. So if we look at the landscapes and the technoscapes of higher education technology, we've seen an immense growth and innovation, the large-scale industrialization of higher education and education technology, education in many other ways. And our previous speaker, Prof. Muhi, had referred to that. There is a plethora of private and public actors. There has been a customization of educational products and even off-the-shelf products. So the role of big technology, the Amazons, Google, social media platforms have become very important. They are those that have the enabling technology to provide access, but also, of course, the money to develop this. So we see more actors, more innovation, more options to students, more accessibility, but we are mindful that we live in a higher education north and a higher education south. If we consider the idea of new cyber horizons, what are available? So here, we are familiar with artificial intelligence, at least the concept. We've been exposed to virtual reality, augmented reality. And the purpose of these technologies is that it should be accessible, fit for purpose, customized, and it should produce results and utility to the ideal society 4.0. But that does not mean that this kind of environment should not consider society 1.0. As I say, there are these global inequalities. So what are the major requirements? We need at least new horizon exposure to quantum computing. Plus, we know that the power of algorithms are so important in the customization of higher education technology. So we will need not only the clouds and the bytes, so we are already beyond what we know as terabytes. And not all educational institutions are ready for this. So who is in the classroom of University 4.0? So we have to consider the role of technology, the teacher, and personhood. So if we talk about techno teachers, some new personalities are involved. It is not only a physical teacher, as we've seen in University 1.0 to 3.0, but we've seen the rise of bots, virtual personalities that have to be able to connect to the student. We have to be very careful not to lose the humanity of teaching, the interaction. There must be an element of humanness. And here, the ethical considerations of education becomes very important. It will have an impact on the philosophy of teaching, the self-actualization of the student. And of course, as Professor Muhi has referred us to, that safety and security are important. And then, of course, also accountability. So there is a new legal context on the rise, not only for technology, but also for educational law. So what is required? We've moved through papyrus, paper, and people. So first of all, we need to have new thinking and new mindsets. We need to think of an edutopia, a new era of education that is the aspiration. So appropriate higher education teachers. In other words, we need to train teachers, be it academic teachers or at least school teachers. Our pedagogists must be mindful of these changes. And of course, our assessment techniques will change. Then, of course, the technological infrastructure must be appropriate, accessible, sustainable, and adaptable. So we will also be experiencing, or at least requiring, a new type of higher education student for whom this curriculum and teaching and assessment must be custom-made. So we need to meet the demands, and it must be instant, and as said, fit for purpose, but the integrity of the assessment process must be maintained. So how do we have a meeting of minds between theory and practice? In terms of curriculum 4.0, I think a very important principle is that it should be locally relevant, but on a global standard. Student progression and human development must take place. We should see the student growing, irrespective of age. It must contribute to human development. Sector-specific curriculum could be or should be developed in consultation with industry, or at least the working environment. And I can foresee more public-private higher education partnerships. And here the caveat is that education standards must be met. But then there is a question, what will be the impact on academic freedom and funding when we have these big tech and public and private partnerships? What will be the purpose of education versus training? What is the self-actualization of both the student and the teacher? So how do we get the classroom 4.0 and teaching 4.0 together? We need to consider the idea of space. Where is the student and the teacher, and where is the classroom? Is it physical, immersed, or hybrid? And then, of course, the idea of time. When is class? Is it on demand, or is there a time that a student and a teacher clock in? What is the substance of this new teaching and classroom experience? What is in the curriculum? Does the kind of subject enable a specific pedagogy? So we need to have theory meeting technology. And then what is the activity? What is the learning curve that is supposed to take place? But there are a number of caveats, and some of the fallouts could be that do we have self-actualized individuals if we go high-tech, but we remain low on human contact? To some extent, one can expect some techno-trauma where individuals are not able to relate to other individuals in a face-to-face context, where the computer, or at least the technological environment, is sometimes not able to convey emotions. And then, of course, the relevant and the subject-specific requirements. So how do we get students to make the grade? So what should assessment 4.0 entails, or what could it? So who assesses? Is it the techno teacher, artificial intelligence, or is it a bot, or is it people of flesh and blood? Or is it in industry that plays a role? Some industries, as you know, have regulatory bodies that can perhaps play a role. But when is assessment also taking place? We know that there are some fields that are time specific. Medical studies, for example, when a student is exposed to a certain disease and the study of thereof, the pathology determines certain time that needs to spend. So assessment ideally should be ongoing, but there should be a different text that the student is exposed to. And of course, how do we also then see the behavioral assessment of a student? Do the participation of the student, how is the student being able also to engage? So what assessment models are available? We've seen the in loco, face-to-face, and of course, virtual, and I think in this interim phase, more of the hybrid model. But it is important that, and I repeat myself here, that the integrity of assessment must be maintained. Cybersecurity will have to be improved. It must, of course, be appropriate for the level, and there must be progress. Now, there is a generator in the room, or an elephant in the room, to put it differently. What is required to achieve these ideals of just edutopia? Electricity, to start off with. Not all in the global south have access to it. Europe itself has a power crisis currently. What is the quality of basic education that prepare higher education students for this new environment? What equipment is available and required? How accessible is? What is the cost? And of course, what employment opportunities are available? And of course, the ideal situation is lifelong learning 4.0, where this idea of microcredits or nano qualifications can come in. But I think we will reach a point where we will go back to something of education or University 1.0, where some of the old school ideals and practices, there will come a time when there would be some throwback to that, but it's too early, I think, for that. So between edutopia and technotopia, so it's not so easy to delete, to backspace, to change once a situation or a practice has been instituted, policies and frameworks has been adopted. Education is a basic human right and a major developmental goal, as Professor Mohi has also alluded to. So there must be alignment between industry, society, university, and humans. What do we do in terms of techno-trauma? It may be something that we have already missed in terms of the pathology, the online behavior of students or of individuals. We've seen cyberbullying, for example, taking place. How does that affect human behavior? And can technology do it all? Can we really marry an edutopia and a technotopia? There can even be a doomsday in the classroom where dark technology can be brought in, where there are hacking taking place, students are very smart, and even a bot armies coming in. So this is really the most extreme situation, but these are things that we need to be mindful of. Let me conclude. The future is rosy, or perhaps light blue. This is the light computers emit, but it is an adventure of innovation. We do experience already and will continue to experience deep uncertainty, disruption, but we must be resilient and relevant in terms of our offerings, practices, and of course the outcomes. How ready are we? Or are we still in a situation where we use candles in the classroom and not high quality energy provided? We will see the rise of a super university. Those that have access to the best technology and finance can establish a university that is beyond 4.0. So, do we have an edutopia? There is a biblical reference to wood collectors and water bearers, but we must be mindful of employment specialization that need to be brought in here. Technology cannot achieve all the good things. We must be mindful of human nature and human behavior. We must be ready for future 4.0. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you so much, Prof. van Wyk. That was super interesting. And again, like with Prof. Mohi, I've got all these questions that have sprung to mind. I love there were some definite things that sort of aligned and in some ways also didn't align, which we're going to make some interesting conversation in a moment. So thank you for that. That was really interesting. So we're now going to hand over to our last panelist who has popped up next to me. I've had the pleasure of knowing Prof. Ngambi for a few years and doing some work with him together. And he is a true academic with a passion for education technology. And he's been involved in the area for many years. You wouldn't think so looking at him, because you can see he looks young like me. But he has been involved in EdTech and really interesting innovations in technology and education for a long time. So Dick Ngambi is a full of educational technology programs in the School of Education at the University of Cape Town. He is the founder and project director of the Educational Technology Inquiry Lab, ETILab, a digital sandpit for learning technology uses through play. His work at the ETILab investigates how to create cultures of innovation and unleash creativity in education. He has served as a principal investigator and a co-investigator on several projects, and he's currently leading an open educational resource of indigenous games in Africa, a project that is involving 12 African countries. And he is a rated researcher by the NRF. And so I'm very excited to introduce Prof. Ngambi. He's going to be speaking on building with decolonized blocks, an open educational resource of indigenous games in Africa. Over to you, Prof. Ngambi.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I will definitely be able to speak on the topic of building with decolonized blocks. I just want to, I'm sure you can be able to hear me. Is that right?
Yep, perfect.
Well, that's good. So what I'll be talking about really is this whole debate about decolonization of the curriculum, decolonization of education, which all of us in higher education are familiar with, that kind of debate. And what I'll be able to spend most of the time talking about is this project, the Open Education Resource of Indigenous Games, because Indigenous Games are one of those kind of activities that are blocked out or relegated to outside school, and they have actually survived being colonized, and therefore we can actually draw on Indigenous games to build on effective learning, and that's what I want to be able to do. And the Open Educational Resource of Indigenous Games is a project that seeks to document the Indigenous Games, because the Indigenous Games, as we know, they have been handed down from one generation to another through oral traditions, and that they have not necessarily been handed down through traditional formal education. And we also know that every young person has played, or any adult has played games before. We're talking about non-digital games here to start with. So everyone has played non-digital games, and we grew up playing these games. And as we've become adults, our current children are not necessarily playing these Indigenous games as much as we played them, because they are so we are going to actually lose a very important component of teaching using knowledges that these students are able to relate to, and knowledge they bring with as prior learning to a space. What this project has actually therefore has been about is to not only document these games, but to advocate for these Indigenous games to enter the mainstream curricula as a teaching and learning resource. And by doing that, we preserve the knowledge of Indigenous games from becoming extinct, and we're able to use the Indigenous games to decolonize the curriculum, to decolonize. And I'll be able to spend some time just talking about how that would work and what that means and the implications of that to education 4.0. And I think that is quite important to actually begin to understand just how that is going to play out. What we have is that this project has 11 African countries participating on it, and those are the countries listed there. And the project has been, it has we have a sub-project there, which is actually looking at the games that...
Sorry, sorry, Dr. Ngambi, can you hear us? I think he's having a problem with connection.
Yeah, I think it was just going, he was
Okay.
starting to lose him just near the end there. And I think, have we lost him? Oh, there, he takes back. Prof. Ngambi, are you there? Okay. I think it just, your connection dropped for a second. You're on mute. So if you can just, and you might have to, we lost your share. So if you just share, let's do the last 30 seconds. It's sort of knocked out. There we go.
Okay, that's good. So what we have actually been doing with these games is that as we collect these games from adults, we classify these games in terms of the playing experience of the games, and we document the kind of learning domains that emerge from each of these games. And we see that the playing experience of indigenous games are classified according to what we see on the pie chart on the left-hand side. We see the learning domains of each of these is classified as such because we actually analyze the pedagogical value of these games. And I just want to focus on one of those games so that I can be able to just show you the implications of indigenous games. One of the games is called Ichienga, and this game is given different names from different countries. And this particular game is reported from Zambia. And the game is very familiar for a number of people across Africa. You actually put stones, you draw a big circle, and then you choose smaller stones and you put them in a circle, like as you see in step one, and that you throw one bigger, a slightly bigger stone up in the air. And while it is in the air, you take some stones out from the bigger circle, and then you throw the stone up again, as in step three, and you use, while the stone is still in the air, you push the remaining stones back in the bigger circle, and then you take the stone that has been left out there, and then you take the bigger stone and you throw it up there, as in step four, and you take now you leave two stones out, so you take the three in, and the process continues. So what the game here is about is that you take one stone, throw it out there, and then you have different levels. If the bigger stone that you've thrown in the air drops, before you push the stones back, you lose your 10, and others have their 10, they play the game, and until everyone has had the 10 in level 1, and then level 2 and level 3 to the very end. That's how this game is played. The game itself, it teaches lots of body coordination in terms of coordinating the eyes and the body and this and so on. It allows one to connect like that. It's a very famous game. From the educational point of view, you actually see that this game can be able to teach sets. And you actually look at the set theory, you look at the groupings, you actually look at how you can teach topologies. You can look at the different ways in which you can be able to teach this. What we're actually doing is that looking at a game like this, you can teach algorithms, you can actually teach logical reasoning, computational thinking. You can actually teach lots of things from this game. So from the game that is played outside school by young people, and as it progresses, the game becomes much more, it's still meaningful, but what you begin to layer on it becomes much more complex in terms of doing all these different, the algorithm designs, as I've mentioned. The end goal of our project is to actually get, once we have documented the indigenous games and created an open educational resource of indigenous games, we would get the younger generation in terms of the theory. What we have actually done here is that we look at how you can look at the way we collect these games. We've used the cultural activity theory to actually represent what is going on here. We see on the left-hand side, we see how that that we're using these different tools to represent the kind of meaning or the kind of learning designs or the lessons that are embedded within the game. And we can see the subject working on the object being mediated by the tools there. We see that every game has got rules. They are part of the community, and then we see the different forms of the divisions of labor there. We actually see how you can embed an indigenous game in the classroom to actually have which is more about the mathematics that you learn in day-to-day, but it is not normally taught in the formal curriculum. And that the ethnomathematics then becomes useful if we are going to teach and introduce meaningful and engaging learning and allow students to actually not fear mathematics, to actually begin to relate to most of the mathematical concepts that would otherwise become so difficult to understand. When one latches that with indigenous games, you are actually connecting with the knowledges that most of these students already bring with to the learning space. And that the whole idea of understanding mathematics and physics and so on becomes much easier to comprehend once we do that. What we are then able to do is that if we look at the way these two, the way we are conceptualizing the process of capturing indigenous gains using the activity system, like in this case, we see system on the left-hand side, which represents the process that the researchers are involved in capturing these indigenous games mediated by tools, the technology. For example, the Airtable is what we're using as a backend to actually capture these different indigenous games. And the object there is to share indigenous games that adults played when they were young. And then we actually see that then brings us into this kind of outcome. And on the right-hand side, we see an activity system where the idea of playing games, you are able to then use that to document the pedagogical value of each of those games and bring us to a space where the Origa project, which is the project that this
I think we lost you again, Prof. Ngambi. Are you still there? As we get into the climax, we lost Prof. Ngambi. Let's see if he appears. There. Are you back? Yeah, I can see you again. Do you want to share again? Just again, the last sort of like minute just went off. And yeah, just remember to unmute. There we go. Yeah, just unmute. You're still on mute.
Sorry.
There.
So this is the last slide. So I was actually trying to say that there is potential for indigenous games to be integrated in education, particularly in education, to allow our students to not only learn things in abstract terms, but that connect with the knowledges that they bring with, because they have played these indigenous games, and that we can use them as a springboard to teach them science and to teach them mathematics, as in the example that I've actually shown, and to teach them computing, to teach them design, to teach them that they can actually be able to design digital indigenous games. And that way, will keep this resource of indigenous games much more active, as opposed to just documenting them and putting the documentation on the shelf. So the goal of the project is to have an active documentation, active preservation of indigenous games, where the games are not just used from the open educational resource to play with, which of course that happens, but educators are able to then use this resource to actually determine what is it that they want to teach, what kind of games would be appropriate to actually teach like that, because then they can be able to search in the open educational resource, and then they can also be able to use the open educational resource to help teach computational reasoning and also design and game designs based on indigenous games. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ngambi. Very interesting. And like it brings a total different perspective to our conversation, which is exactly what we wanted. Right. So thank you to our three panelists. We're all going to leap back into the room. So if our three panelists, Prof. Mohi, Prof. Van Wyk, and Prof. Ngambi, take your seats. We're just going to have, I'm going to put a couple of questions to you just to chat a little bit about this. Sorry, Dick, let me bring you down. Let me get you onto your chair. There we go. Right. Once again, for your presentations. Let's just chat about a couple of things. I want to just start quickly with you, Prof. Mohi. A fascinating conversation around micro-credentialing, which, to my mind, has definitely got to play a huge role going forward. It obviously is going to have a major shake-up on, as you just said, on how we think about education, higher education. And you already said you potentially could get pushback from vice chancellors because it's not a model that we're used to. I know at our own university, we vacillated between what we call 8 credit point modules and then 16 credit points and 32 credit points, which went from a year down to half a semester. And now we're talking about this indescribable, undefinable, or vacillatingly small little units. So it's been traumatic enough for us to move between 32, 18, and 16. What is the X credit point unit going to look like? So in your view, what's going to, well, before I ask the question, COVID forced us to do online. Okay, we had no option. It made us do a whole lot of things. What, in your view, is going to cause a shift of a university of this huge structural change to start to say, we are going to bring in these micro transferable credentials into our syllabus and into our institutions?
Yes, thank you, Craig. I'll start by saying first for sure that micro-credentials are not going to replace completely courses that lead to qualifications in universities. And I don't think this is the motivation as well. However, based on how things get dynamic in the world, how the challenges get dynamic, and how our students and our teachers and our universities have to adapt to a rapidly changing workplace. I mean, I always say 10 years ago, we didn't know that there will be Uber Eats and, Amazon, Uber Rides, etc. And today we are all living with that. I mean, it won't be right to say that we do not use these services, Airbnb, etc. So similarly, everything is changing very quickly, and we've got to adapt our curriculum, our courses, etc. And you know how universities are. Once we approve a structure for a course, a curriculum, it might take years before we manage to really modify. So I think in that sense, micro-credentials do put this adaptability and flexibility to the course and to make sure that it stays relevant in that workplace. The second thing which I personally think, and I liked Professor Ngambi's idea on that earlier, is the increasing cost of producing knowledge. And we all know about that, and the number of people who would get into academia, whether universities would still be able to afford face-to-face lecturers, professors that would produce materials from scratch, and keep on reproducing or duplicating whatever in another country or another region has done when you are in a big country. And I believe that this causes a lot of a big burden on university financial situation, and using micro-credentials which have already been developed, quality assured, etc., mostly freely in the case of OER, and probably in the world that is coming, we will have more and more free resources. Universities will be bound to take this kind of option. And third and finally, for the student, our students are digitally native, and they are no longer interested to sit in front of a lecturer for 3 hours and to listen to what is thermodynamics or what is energy engineering. I mean, I taught that 30 years ago. And I was just thinking, if I had to teach that again, I would rather need all those simulation devices, visualization, and OERs and materials that are developed from MIT, for example. Why would I start developing all that from scratch? So all these are big motivations for us to go ahead. But like I said in my concluding slide, we will have to be careful as well in putting in place the instruments to ensure that all this is not abused. So thank you, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great segue into question I want to ask you, Prof. Van Wyk, because there's definitely, you touched on a couple of things. And for example, you touched on curriculum 4.0, which is obviously us thinking about how we recurriculate things, and how, in your view, would a new form of curriculum link in with the concept of micro-credentialing, for example? Because all of a sudden that sort of, knocks up against it, and we have a very standard curriculums, if I don't put it that way. We have sort of flows that you go through, and all of a sudden you've got this new player in the game that makes us have to rethink, well, what is curriculum 4.0?
Thank you very much for that, Prof. Lewin. Yes, of course, it will be a very competitive environment. If a student can literally pick from the shelf a qualification or a credit that he or she wants to enroll into, to make a qualification solid and recognizable, it will mean that we will have to be very smart. So it means that teachers, lecturers will have to be trained totally different. And this is, of course, a discussion for a very different day than today. But I think also that the exposure of students to various other options become very important. But there is also a very strong nationalistic element. Governments like to control education also. I mean, we see that there's educational policy that's either speaks to the past and or the future of a country. So those are some of the legal and ethical questions that I think we will need to get to. And of course, the accreditation of a micro credit. Is that then in line with what the final qualification will be? So in terms of curriculum, I think it is very important then to see also the unit or the credit, what that would be. But in the end, the student must be able to walk away with something that is usable, something that is relevant to society. And that becomes the challenge to both student and teacher, is how do you then prepare a qualification for some jobs that we don't even know will exist? We cannot imagine it. And that's why I started off by saying is that, moving from science fiction to science fact. And we need to have ways to stimulate our thinking about that. I hope I've addressed.
That's your point. I see Dick's just vanished. He's done the Star Trek on us, and he's zooming up his body. We're waiting to come back.
I'm here. Yeah.
Are you there, Dick?
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Okay. You've just vanished out of my panel.
Yeah,
so
that's
okay,
right.
not sure. Okay. Right. If you are there somewhere, that is wonderful. I actually wanted to put a question to you. There we go. I see you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Which was related to what we've just been having a conversation, because you're coming at it from a different side, which is quite interesting. And you're talking about, in some senses, the tactile of the practical. Now we're sitting here in this high activation, education activation lab. We're on Zoom, and you're talking about sort of indigenous games, things that people touch. And I was actually listening to a very interesting podcast recently, and the person was sharing one of the biggest risks we've got in our world today is we're ending up with a generation that actually doesn't know how to do very basic tactile things, like use a pair of scissors. It was one of the examples she gave. You think that's obvious, that people don't know how to use a pair of scissors because they've seen it on digital, they might have seen it on a movie, but they never had to pick it up themselves. And it comes to this point where, are we losing in the future as we're going forward? And we've got these great technologies, there's no stopping them. That's absolutely sure. It's just getting faster and faster and faster. Are we losing the very important blend of the sort of real and the cultural and the tactile, which is what you potentially are trying to address, especially the cultural element and that, but it's even more than that. It's actually even the tactile element and the things that people do and touch and smell, etc. And how do we combine that? Like you talk about those games and things, how do we bring that into this digital space, which is invariably going to be the king going forward? How do we not lose that, but actually bring it in so its strength is still felt in what's going to happen in the future university?
No, definitely. I think that's a good question, because one of the things that we see is that the world itself is not just going to be about digital and only digital. We know that that is not the way to go per se. And one of the things that we see about the indigenous games is the way right from the young age, children learn to be creative. You are creative through play. And we see the kind of young minds they develop being, using imaginative play. They do some kind of role plays, they imagine things and they act those things out. Today, most of these tech companies, the innovative spaces, for them to innovate, you are actually inviting people to imagine things and to birth things from imagination. And to actually do that, they need to actually play things out. And where do they do that? When we become adults, we play with ideas, we play with different kinds of possibilities. But we actually need to find ways in which we can get back to a way in which one can model those. And I do remember just how that when my daughter went to the architecture school to do architecture, and they started learning how to build these models, not just drawing, they have got to create these models. And they are doing things with their hands, in as much as they should be able to use the tools to sketch things out, but creating these models became quite important. And that there's still a lot of space for that. And I think we should be able to find ways in which we can get this generation to conceptualize and to design solutions that they can be able to use their own, they can draw imagination from the practical stuff. One of the kind of big challenges of education today has been the fact that we are creating a generation of very educated minds who are unable to solve practical problems. And in most of the developing world, there are so many practical problems that we need to deal with. And that we have, on one hand, people that have become so educated that they can't do any practical stuff. And I think we need to be able to ensure that we can be able to bridge that. We can be able to ensure that even the things that are designed in the digital, we should be able to say, well, you need to be able to put this thing in the real world scenario or something like that. What indigenous games do is to help us to do that. It helps us to bridge that absence of touch, the absence of the touch and feel, bringing our senses to, all our senses to the element of play. And I think this is going to be quite a big deal in higher education as we move forward.
Yeah, it's absolutely great, because the podcast is referring to, the lady said exactly that. She said there is a risk, and she's talking about North America, of their entire power grid could be shut down because they don't have the skills of people who actually know how to. They have lots of engineers who understand things theoretically. They don't have the people who actually understand on the ground. And she was talking about how these practices, she said she could walk into a place and just look and get a feel of what was going wrong there. And we're missing out on those practical things, which is maybe a great segue to ask a question. Prof. Mani, do you want to say something? I can see you've got a...
No, that's fine.
Okay, because it segues into the question that someone has asked that has to do with, if we now start to create these micro-credentialing, okay, so people would maybe go and start to find things that are nice practical skills. I want to do a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this. These are great because these are my interests. And a lot of those could tend to be more practical than theoretical, because often people are more attracted to that than something that might be more theoretical or philosophical. And so they might pick up some great little practical skills. The question is, are these things, as the question says, gets correct training, that they're going to automatically get employed? There are many factors that come into play. Example, the economy is not growing, hence limited job creation. Are we creating an illusion that, wow, you're put together this really flexible micro-credentialing thing, you've got all these little bits and pieces which you've sort of curated in your own interest and sphere, but at the end of the day, on the other side, there's no employer that actually wants those little pieces that you stuck together and glued together to create this bigger thing. Is there a danger in that sort of self-building types curriculum? Yeah, Prof. Modi.
Yes, yes, I think that's the danger. It's always the danger when you're trying to introduce a new set of, learning experiences. But it will all depend on the framework that the specific country puts in place, whether it allows all those micro-credentials to be stackable without a formal degree and would be recognized as a formal qualification and things like that. But since that was why I was reacting when Professor Ngambi was talking about what was happening in the Western world, in the States, etc. I know that in Canada and in the US, a lot of people are getting jobs only on their micro-credentials. Like they are following nano degrees with Udacity, for example. Udacity is known to kind of employ those young, I won't say students, but rather graduates with the basic competencies in computer science, and then would have some specific micro-credentials that they would need to develop, let's say, softwares, for example. And so that I can remember even my son asking me, what's the worth of going to university? If at the end of the day, my friends are doing some micro-credentials over a 1 year or 2 year period, and then they are getting employed. Yeah, but we should not forget that university is not just to get employment. At the end of the day, this whole debate about knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination, etc. Although I still feel that building micro-credentials on specific skills like decision making, solving problems, or all those critical skills for the University 4.0, Society 4.0 will only help that graduate. Right? Because at the end of the day, very often we do not have time to teach them those practical skills that are now needed on the market. So I believe we need a balance. And this is where experts and educators, Professor Vani, Professor Ngambi, Professor Blewett, yourself at the level of universities and senior management should help decision makers and policy makers make appropriate decisions into what is the right balance, and all the example how to assess those micro-credentials, whether to assign credits to them, whether not to assign, how many credits, etc., etc. It's a whole world, a whole new world.
I think what you've raised is super important. It actually leads to another question. Maybe Prof. Van Wyk, you can pick up on this, because we've got a sort of two things pulling us. On the one side, we've got what you just said. At the end of the day, it's about employment. on the grander scale. We need to be employed. So people look and say, what's the quickest, easiest, cheapest way for me to get employed? Okay, and as you said, well, if I do X number of micro-credentials, I'm going to get a job. That's the one side. The other side is universities. We try and respond to industry. But on top of that, we are places, we are academic institutions. Now, I know that that's changed, and the university has changed, and there's huge pressure on it over the years. 500 years ago, there were only 0.1% of us at universities. Now we all go to universities, and we become places where you churn out employable people, not necessarily thinkers, which the university used to be. So now we have this challenge. Well, the pure university should be a place, as one of the questions said, that was posed somewhere, I think it was on our wall, is, are universities skill development colleges or educational institutions? And that's an interesting question that we need to answer, because is that dependent on industry? What is it dependent on? So maybe Prof. Vanwyk or Prof. Ngobi, if any of you want to pick up, are universities skill development colleges or educational institutions going forward? What should we be? Prof. Vanwyk, you're on mute at the moment. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of both, where it is important that university respond to what is required by society. I think we have a model already of that, where medical students do their so-called Zuma year, where you are educated, the state sponsors your medical education, but you give something back. So you have a lot of theoretical knowledge, but now go where it matters. So I think that is also perhaps a model to consider. I think another thing is that, and I like that what Professor Ngobi said, is that technology is not the panacea necessarily. And we need to strike that balance. We need to have higher thinking and critical thinking faculties developed. But yeah, I think there is a place for technical colleges where that kind of practical skills are offered, or alternatively, then one must have an institution, and this is very costly, where all of that is incorporated. We see more and more the idea of science campuses, Silicon Valley, for example, MIT, where there is an effort that theoretical sciences are then placed alongside the practical aspect of that. In South Africa, we have at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, where students are taught, for example, space and physics and astronomy. By the end of that PhD, they must be able to build a launchable satellite, a nanosatellite. So that, I think, is the kind of model that we should strive towards. And that can come, I think, this is where industry, the public and the private partnerships are extremely important. Also, then, what is the idea of education? For the common good, surely, but also for what makes us human. We can teach students nuclear physics, but there must be a place for the humanities that says, this is amazing science, but it is very dangerous.
Yeah.
And this is where I think that balance needs to be.
Yeah, I think, Prof. Vanwyk, that's a key point. And maybe, Prof. Ngobi, I don't know if you want to pick up on that, because you definitely came from that side. And in one of our pre-panel discussions, we were talking about the concept of Ubuntu, and those are all the connection side. Those are all the for the greater good. Because at one level we can say, well, forget the greater good. I need to get a job. What should I do? Just teach me what I need to know right now so I get the job. And I understand that. But those things change. And that's where education is so key, because it's a basis beyond that or below that, but we need both. Otherwise, we can't just train philosophers and they can't get a job. So how do we do this thing that caters to what Prof. Vanwyk says, the greater good, while also making our people employable and having something that's of value?
Right. I think, well, I would like to support that. One of the things that we need to be able to, my view really is that universities are there to generate knowledge, to make knowledge, to produce knowledge, and that they will continue to do that. And the universities are there to ensure that they not only do that, but they do that being mindful that they are not necessarily, they don't live in a vacuum. They are part of society. So whatever they do needs to be relevant to the society where they are inserted. And part of that good means producing for employment, but also producing people that can solve problems in that. Because you're actually responsible for actually doing that. There's going to be these other institutions that develop skills. The artisans, we're actually going to need that. But we also need to know that it is important to be mindful of the social justice issues, to be mindful of ensuring that we have an even playing ground, an even playing field, and that one way of doing that to prepare people for employment and to ensure that we are fair in doing that, we need to have effective strategies of recognizing prior learning, recognizing the knowledges that people bring with to the learning space so that you can connect with that and then build them to actually prepare them for where they need to go. And that is the reason why there's been all these kind of myth that certain people cannot do engineering or cannot do science or cannot do mathematics because for whatever reason, and that understanding it leads to most of the young people being crippled from doing science subjects or mathematics much earlier in their school life, and that when those things are removed, they cannot be able to pursue science fields or mathematics or any kind of engineering fields. Now, what we are trying to do with the whole idea of indigenous knowledge is that we need to be able to realize that if we can connect with what learners and students bring with to the learning space, we can then be able to ensure that we don't assume that they know nothing, because what they know has not been recognized. And I think that is what would make it much more effective to ensure that once we can connect with them at that point, we can more or less be able to teach them anything, and we can prepare them for the work world. We can prepare them for industry properly, as opposed to losing them because of the nature of what we want to teach them has become so abstract too quickly that they can't understand it because they can't relate it to anything that they know before. And I think that is what becomes quite a huge problem, because if we are trying to teach anything, think of anything, and we've thought through this, particularly relating what the formal curriculum is about in mathematics and what the formal curriculum is in different kinds of sciences. And we can be able to see the things that these children or these students know already, which if as educators, if we knew that and we drew from that, they can understand the concepts, and then it becomes easier for us to teach them whatever it is, and then we can prepare them for the work world. And I think that's what becomes quite useful. So we still need to prepare students for employment, but we also need to know that it's not just a matter of preparing for employment, is to prepare them to become innovative, to create jobs, to make jobs, to create jobs. And to create jobs, you are going to need innovators. You're going to need creative minds if they're going to create jobs, to understand where gaps are, where problems are, where challenges are, to innovate and see where those gaps are. And I think that is where creativity becomes in. And so on one hand, we are mindful of the fact that we need to be able to create graduates who can go and fill the job market as it exists. But where will future jobs come from? Future jobs are going to come from preparing minds that can think differently, that can see from where they are, the gaps that there are, so they can innovate solutions to actually create jobs in the future. And I think that is where innovative minds, creativity, and ingenuity becomes quite important. Otherwise, we become consumers. And if we are consumers, we are going to sit there waiting for the supplier as opposed to us being able to produce stuff.
Yeah, I think, that's really where the big balance comes in. We can be so tempted to want to do the quick fix, which is to find the little short course that will get you the job. And that may address short-term things, but we have to develop innovators. We have to develop creative thinkers. We have to develop, and a lot of those things are often the types of things that maybe you possibly wouldn't pick even in a micro-credentialing career. Maybe it is a philosophy thing, or maybe it is the thing on ethics, or maybe it's a thing on rational thinking, or whatever it may be. Yet those are the greater university things. But I think, as everyone's saying here, it is finding this balance. And we are under a challenge because universities have changed, they've become different, and we've got to respond. Right now, there is some time. I'm just going to, if there's anyone in the chat room or anywhere else who other wants to raise their hand and ask a question, you can either just do it with audio, or you can, I'll try to see which ones we've got in. Really concerned about the issue of students losing tactile skills. Yes, thanks, Charlotte. That's exactly something that we've been chatting about. Right, I see Imkondeli. You've got your hand up. Do you just want to unmute or put your camera on, or one or both, and you can put your question, please.
Good day, colleagues. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Good to see you again, Prof. Lloyd.
Yeah, nice.
And thank you for all the panelists you brought us. I think for me, a lot of important things have been said, but what on the point Prof. Ngambi has just made, and thank you, by the way, Prof. I'll be following your work. I think it's very interesting. I'm a scholar in African culture, African history, and all of those things. So obviously, I've been thinking about all of these things in education. But the thing that you mentioned about us needing to create minds that will create the jobs, because I am also concerned about employment, for graduates, because it's a basic concern for every single person, because it speaks to survival. It's a survival issue, So I wonder though, what do you think about this? Because I've thought about this issue for a while in terms of changing how we think, especially in the South African education system. Do you think maybe it makes more sense to sort of start preparing our children to think along those lines from the primary education level, instead of trying to get them to start thinking as creators, entrepreneurs, and innovators, and so on at university, for example? I don't know what you and the other panelists think about that.
That's a great question. So yeah, should we be bringing these skills in earlier, this creative entrepreneurial type thinking, or do we, I know this is a sort of before the higher education, but does anyone, maybe Prof. Moe, you're involved in the greater picture of higher education, and you obviously having to get the feeder, the secondary people in. Do you think we should be pushing some of this training and education and mindset lower down? Or are we okay with the schools giving us what they give us and then we'll take it from there?
That's a tough one. That's a very tough one. Although I do think, like everything else, all this will be in a circle. There will be a cycle. Nowadays, I would say for some years, we've moved from that real, how would I say, philosopher thinking. We used to always say universities to create thinkers, right? We've moved slowly because of human capital development. It's very clear. I fully agree with this young chap. I just heard that, employment, whatever we tend to say, let's be honest, employment is about survival at some point. Yeah, right. So people go to primary, secondary, tertiary school eventually to be able to put some food on the plate, and you know how things go. Today we are talking about this balance of how much of thinking should we be leading to, and how much of skills development to be really to jump into the employment market, etc. I believe this will continue to rise for some time because of that changing landscape of employment and of the workplace. As Professor Van Wyk said, I fully agree. We are totally uncertain of what type of jobs will exist in the future. But I believe in how nature works and how all this will become a cycle, when at some point we will be reaching a point where there are probably too many practical skills on the ground and not enough thinkers to be able to be visionary and build the world or build the future. So this is at this point that people will have, probably not our generation, I don't know, we'll have to revisit this whole idea about what we're talking about. But I agree with, I couldn't get his name, Mukondelele, that all these concepts have to be taught now and discussed from primary, secondary, and tertiary. I don't think that we should expect people when they reach tertiary level, like we put on a switch, now they will know how to produce the skills. All these things, especially about sustainability, about environmental, I mean, I'm a professor in environmental engineering. I can't avoid saying that, but all these issues about sustainability, our planet Earth, all these green issues have to start from very, very small. And I think we will have really to rethink on really looking at curriculum, but not just increasing low workload and academic workload for students so that they are overwhelmed. We will have to be very smart. I don't really know. We have to think as networks, as groups of people, communities of practice over all these issues so that we can be smart in the way forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a great answer, because it definitely, I think what you've done is pulled us out and saying there is a cycle here. You know, we often see the world only in our very narrow piece of history, and we respond to that. And we, as you said, we are responding to that. We're responding with trying to put more skills on the ground. And I think, as all of the panelists have said, that's great. But if you lose tactile, if you lose thinkers, theorizers, we'll have another problem. A huge problem. But I think it's a cycle that works itself out. Just another maybe sort of related question. Maybe Dick, you want to take this one, because I'm not sure exactly what the situation is at UCT. But I know a lot of the universities in South Africa, and I'm sure in Mauritius and around the world, are going along with, well, it's back to in classroom teaching. Can you hear me, Dick? No, not yes. Can you hear me? Okay, well, if you can't hear me, his thumb's not up. You okay?
Yeah.
You can't hear it. Okay. Well, then maybe I'll put it to Prof. Baker, whoever can hear this.
Sorry, I haven't heard at all.
Can you hear us, Prof. Ngambi? Okay, I think Prof. Ngambi's mic or something, or headphones have died. But anyway, the question is, you know, there's this call to go back to face-to-face teaching, which we understand.
I can't hear the question. I can't hear at all. I don't know what's going on there. I can't hear.
Okay, I'm not sure. Okay.
Maybe put it on the chat, no?
Yeah. Okay, let me say, I've actually got it on the chat here. Right, let's see where I had that question somewhere. Yeah, there we go. Okay, well, this is the question basically, is are the return to classroom calls a move towards implementing University 4? You know, we're all trying to move back to normal, as it were.
I couldn't hear anything at all. I can't hear question.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. Maybe Professor Bake, do you want to try? Yeah, we can hear you.
I mean, I can't.
Okay, Craig, I'm going to just mute Prof. Ngambi in the meantime so that you can continue.
Yeah, okay. So, Prof. Bake, you know, you probably know, even though you're with UNISA, there's this call to come back to the classroom, etc. How does that sort of stack up against we're going to University 4? You know, the concern that was expressed in one of the questions, are we just going to try and step back and it's going to be as it always was? Or do you think, you know, there is no stepping back? To quote Prof. Murray, like you said, it's not going to be like now. So, Prof. Nvek, what do you think? Are we just going to sort of fall back into our old things or what?
Thank you very much. One thing that I've noticed at UNISA, I'm here almost 30 years, what I've noticed is that over time, our student population wanted more contact education. The idea of correspondence university worked for many people for a long time. It may be a generational thing, that we have been experiencing in South Africa, or thing, but we see that students want more contact. So we obviously not all our students can come to campus, but moving back to the classroom, I think there had been a loss of social cohesion, community during the pandemic, and we know that for children it's so important that they develop their skills within a context like that. Now, our socialization is a forever project that we are working with. So I think that we will return to classroom, physical classroom, but we must be mindful that it is a changed environment. To start off with, I think we should ask our students, what was difficult during the pandemic, during the distance, during the close down? What have you learned? And then apply that to our subject. How did you experience education during that time? So I think we should never let a crisis be wasted in the sense that we do not learn from it. And I think it is something that we have to start learning sooner than later. I hope I've addressed that.
Yeah. So it is very interesting in what's going to happen and how we're going to step forward. Universities are notorious. Understandably, we're big institutions. We're led by really old people, this panel excluded, who have steeped in tradition, which is really great. But it also makes shifting things not as easy, and taking on new ways. And we get pushed from the youth, we get pushed from the younger ones to want to do new things. But we obviously want to try and balance all of this and then take a step forward. But we have huge threats. And we don't have time to pick on it. I know Prof. Van Wyk, you mentioned the super university. And I was just thinking to myself, well, sure, what could that potentially mean? What happens if there is the rise of the so-called super university, maybe Udacity, edX, Coursera, they merge into some huge thing that has reaches here. I already know our own students right now can be studying at any university around the world. Now, it used to be very expensive, but that's changing now. And you could end up with this institution that becomes so well recognized that provides education at such a rate that all of us saying like, well, what is our role? So we can't ignore all of those things, but we also want to have a local relevance. And, so there's a fascinating struggle and thought that has to be put into this as we go forward. And in my view, it has to happen quite soon. The changes that have happened have been so quick, and we haven't even got onto the impact of AI and ChatGPT because that wasn't really going to be part of this conversation, and we'll do it in a future panel because that's made another massive impact. It's going to make a massive impact on assessment, and for all of these things, it's not a matter of simply saying, well, we will ban them. It's like banning Google. It's like banning Wikipedia. Those are technologies that are there. We have to face they are going to just get bigger and bigger. We don't ban them. We say, well, how do we embrace them? And that might mean we have to change things. And I think that's where we're sitting with all of these dilemmas, which are really fascinating. So I'm going to put one final question to each of our panelists before I hand over to a pastor to tie us off. And I really wanted to make this panel about, well, now what? So this is the question that I'll put you, and I'll maybe just go in the same order that we began. So I'll start with Prof. Mohi. What is one practical thing you think universities should do now to help make the shift to University 4.0? So what is one practical thing you think universities should or could do now to help them with the shift to University 4.0? Prof. Mohi.
Right. Unfortunately, I'm given the right to have only one answer. I'll try. So
you can squeeze if you want. That's fine.
Yeah, I think universities should start sharing the good practices and of using technology, of using chatbots, of using AI, and of all those discussions that we are having. They should be able to share amongst themselves so that we can, as a group, as a collective group, take informed decision. I think universities are working too much in isolation. And just to spring back on what you said, what happens if you have a super university of Coursera or EDX or MIT? I think the trick would be to work together with them right from now on, if that's one thing. Integrate what they have as good in our system and have a sort of win-win situation. It's not always easy. Otherwise, if they start they will eat us otherwise as universities. And then I don't think this will work either, because there are certain disciplines that you will never be able to do online or blended or whatever. And there is also what you said, Craig, so important, the local context, right? We will have to contextualize whatever we are getting. So there's still space for us. So this is hope for all of us. But I think we need to find a way of like events you're doing, but I would also say sharing good practices and also lessons learned, so that everyone is not restarting that cycle again. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you. And I think that's an absolutely spot on. And I love, that's what this panel is about, working together. You know, it's time to bring more people in, and let's try and, you know, not have our own little silos, because we definitely are in a world that's opened up, and we've got to change that mindset from competition to cooperation. And I believe it can be a win-win. So yeah, thank you, Prof. Modi. That's wonderful advice. Right, we hand to Prof. van Wyk. What do you feel is your one practical thing universities could do as we shift towards the future?
First of all, I think we should be mindful that education is an enabler for society. We must adopt a school, for example. A university must be in sync with the schools in its environment, that is typically its feeding source, and then also the primary schools. So we can only think of University 4.0 when we have looked in our backyard. Whether that is a physical backyard, community, I think let's start that sense of community, importance of education, and then see how technology can enable. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Prof. van Wyk. Really powerful sentiment. It's all about getting us linked in. We don't stand alone. We don't float up here in our ivory towers, as sometimes we might think we do. We are dependent on our society, on the people around us, and especially the schools that feed into us. As we've already discussed, those are part of the issue and part of the challenge, and we want to work together so we can create something that is sustainable. Thank you, Prof. van Wyk. And over to Prof. Ngambi. Hopefully you can hear us now. How would you respond to that question of one thing that we should be doing?
Well, I think one thing, in my view, we need to be able to make the most of the kind of social cultural settings where we find ourselves. For example, Ubuntu, which is more about the working together, very communal, collaborative. There is already a nature of collaboration by, you know, in the social cultural setting does have collaboration as a default setting, you know, the Ubuntu. And I think if we can be able to leverage that and make the most of that, we can actually be able to go further together faster, as opposed to, and meaningfully so, as opposed to building what has already been identified as siloed, competitive kind of learning, which is very individualistic, which slows things up quite a lot. So we need to be able to find effective strategies of ensuring that we harness what is already there. That is why what is already there in the cultural setting, and I think if we can be able to do that, we'll get we'll lift these students and lift the institutions to where we should be in terms of positioning ourselves on how do we make the most of the technologies, given the richness of the indigenous knowledge systems.
All right, thanks, Prof. Ngambi. I really enjoyed how everyone sort of got into a similar theme, working together, being more inculcated in adopting our schools and our environment, and making the most of our socio-cultural settings. All of that speaks to what we're doing right here, right now, trying to bring us together. There is definitely a push as we see the rise of private universities, and which is good, and we need all of those things as part of the whole picture. But there's definitely a push to the commodification of everything that we're doing. We're becoming more businesses. Our students are often now referred to not as students, as customers, and that changes the whole thing, because as soon as you get into that mindset, well, what we must do, we must compete. We must not talk to each other. And I think that does fly in the face of the real essence of university and education. And I think it's really important that we don't forget that. And I think that's come out as a key takeaway from everything we've done here. So from myself, a very big thank you to my panelists. I'm going to hand over to my esteemed colleague, Pasna, just to close us out now.
Thank you, Craig, for facilitating this session in your typical, exciting, interactive, and thought-provoking style. I'm sure that all our attendees today are inspired to attend our future sessions. To Prof. Mohi, Prof. Van Wyk, Dr. Ngambi, we are very thankful to you for sparing your time to participate in this session and sharing your knowledge and expertise in this topic. A special thank you to the Higher Education Commission of Mauritius for their collaboration in today's session. To Hazel and the College Corporate Relations team, we are grateful to you for your support in the marketing of this event, and we look forward to your continued support in our future sessions. Thank you to all of you for your actively participating and engaging in this conversation. And we humbly request all our participants today to complete the feedback form, which will display in your browser at the end of the session. We invite you to join us on Tuesday, the 4th of April at 10 o'clock South African time, which is GMT +2, with our panelists from Australia, Canada, and Mauritius, who are going to be discussing on how we teach and assess in University 4.0. So till we meet again, stay safe. I know that we run over time slightly, so thank you for bearing with us. And thank you again to all our esteemed panelists. We look forward to your participation in our future collaborations. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, everyone.
Pasna, thanks, everyone. It was really lovely being on the panel, even if it was virtual. It felt like you were here. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone, for making the time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.